today?
I'm good. I'm doing real good. It isn't raining yet, but it looks like it might. So crossing our fingers, windows are closed. It'll be fine.
It looks bright in the camera right now, but it's actually been overcast here for like a few days in Minnesota. It's been pretty cloudy.
What's Minnesota been like lately? Because I don't know anything about. I
That's
mean, I have a friend in Minnesota, but I don't know anything about how it's been lately. You know?
yeah. Fine. Nothing explosive. Nothing. I mean, so I live in Uptown, which it's pretty nice. Nothing. Nothing lately that's been too controversial. No riots, nothing like that. No protests. Well, there's still protesting, but it's not happening in Uptown.
Gotcha. It's so funny because when I went to visit home, like during early COVID, there were BLM protests, but it was kind of funny because the protests in like middle of nowhere, Brown Lake, is so funny in comparison to like the big Chicago protests, which is like news coverage everywhere. You always read about it. But like in the tiny town, like on 2 streets is like the protest up by my hometown. So
Right.
that's all.
Seeing things like that. And what's been happening? What has been the exact kind of like, was it all in response to kind of Kenosha and?
Oh, it was like super early on, like
Okay.
maybe like in June. Yeah, because I went home for a little bit during like that COVID era. It feels like eras and eras.
I mean, it's like we have the Triassic, Jurassic, and what's the third one? I know there's a third one.
God, I didn't even know that.
You know what I mean? It's like the different eras of dinosaurs, but for COVID.
Oh yeah.
There was like March through April, or March through like May, June through August, and now I think we're in like a third.
We're surviving and thriving. More surviving than thriving.
I have grandkids now.
So I'm so glad that we got to watch Love on the Spectrum because I feel like just in terms of autistic folks, there's not a lot of representation out there, and there's not a lot of stories out there.
It's hard to know what else, like what other, like I sometimes still forget and don't know what autism looks like unless it's me and my my experiences with it, whether it's myself or just from also like when I was in aid in high school, or in different like classes or music things. Like just I always did like one-on-one help for kids with autism when I would go on retreats with my synagogue or things like that. So those very specific experiences with autism are what I think of, but there is this gigantic spectrum. And so unless you have personal experience with someone or with I guess if you're part of an autism community, you don't see the other parts of the spectrum other than what you know. And so watching this, I feel like, yes, that's very recognizable to me or entirely foreign.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I never really did have an autism community or, because I am very, very recent in terms of like my discovery. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really interesting because I think I almost was a little shameful at first of seeing those experiences and being like, oh well, it could be worse, I could be like that. But then I was like, wait, that's literally ableism. Like that's literally my ableism. At
the very least, it's projecting a certain fear or shame that we've decided or that you've decided. Like, I mean, I do that too, where I'm like, I think it's sharing both. So you can share the fear or project the fear of, if I were that person behaving that way or having those difficulties, I would be ashamed of myself, or I would be embarrassed. I'd be anxious. Or if I were them, I'd be very proud of myself. I've also had those moments watching this show too. So I've had both. I absolutely have had the same thing where I'm like, oh God, I know what that's like, or I share that anxiety. I would hate to be them right now, or, you know, I've done that before, but I'm past that stage where I have, you know, just a little more self-awareness than that. So I'm looking at them doing that thing that maybe I made the same mistake a long time ago, and I'm going, oh God, if you could only not make that mistake, if you could only know, like, have that experience, because I feel for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just sharing in the, whether it's shame or little moments of pride where you're proud of them for getting over that hurdle or getting through something smoothly.
Like it's like what you said with the shame thing, and it's also feeling shame, like as if we are back into those moments where we've done those same things, or like we're like, oh my God, like I did that, yikes, like you know. And it's so easy to look back at like certain things, at certain behaviors, or just like the way that you exist in the world, and to punish yourself for that, when this is just the way we are, like, this is the way we operate. It's not like we need to change something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, so since we're talking about, I just want to talk about the good things first, and then I'll go into like things that I wasn't too keen on. But something that I really appreciated was that they did represent a lot of different types of people, autistic people, and like just a lot of, like, I remember I saw people of color in there. I will talk about representation later. They did better in some ways than others in terms of representation. But yeah, I did appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't, I got through almost, I think, where am I right now? I think I'm just finishing the 3rd episode. So the last 2 episodes I still have left to go.
Gotcha.
And I'm very excited because I'm really enjoying the show. The first episode was just all tears for me. Like, just, right away, just, especially the parents, especially when I'm like looking at the parents and seeing my own parents, you know, like projecting kind of, or not projecting, but just knowing how hard the parents work, and also what kind of struggles they come into on their own, just both with parenting, with dealing with autism, and altogether being a parent of someone with autism. Recognizing those challenges, also seeing like the pride and how far their kids have come into, you know, being adults now, and how hard it was when they were kids. And I know my parents, I've had just a lot of those same conversations with like my parents recently, of just like the difference between where I am now versus where I was when I was 12 is so nuts. So just, oh, I was just crying the whole first episode. Could recognize like a lot of that, the similarities.
Yeah, and there were so many beautiful moments like that, where it was like, oh yes, like you're being brave, and you're, you know, stepping outside of your comfort zone, and yes, like that's the thing too, is that it's a give and take, right? Like it shouldn't always be autistic people stepping outside of their comfort zones. Like neurotypical people need to step outside their comfort zones as well. So I do, you know, I acknowledge that, and at the same time, it was so nice to see those moments.
I really appreciated that they started with that couple. I'm just spacing out on their names, but the couple who are already a couple at the beginning of the show, and then and then he proposes on the bus, and then they have their little anniversary thing. I was just in love with them immediately, and I really loved that right away. You don't feel, I think this was really good on the director. You don't feel like they're being put in this really uncomfortable foreign environment, like they're just a species that doesn't belong there, that's how you feel so much of the time when you're on the spectrum, is you're just you're like, I feel like I'm the invasive species in an environment where I wasn't supposed to be put in, socially. But you go, you know, you see them, in their home and on their dates and stuff, and you feel like you're in their environment. Such a change to be like, you know, with their pets and their nerd stuff and the trains, and they're in the garden, and they're in their happy place where they're just comfortable and It's an environment that they've grown together. And so you see what that looks like. What does it look like when autistic people who have a loving environment that they're growing themselves, what does that look like versus an environment that is grown by neurotypical people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, that's such a good point. Like, we're always, like, we feel like aliens. I mean, my experience is I've just always felt like an alien. Like, and there were just very few people who I could connect. Yeah, like, it really was like, just for a long time before I, gave it a name,
Mhm.
it was really just like, wow, I don't understand. Like, there are little idiosyncrasies that I just don't understand. And it's so wild because people don't realize how much of communication is nonverbal and how much of it is just like, well, I feel the vibe, so I'm going to go for it. Or like, it feels like we're in sync, so I'm just going to do this. Like, like if you don't have it, you're kind of just like, well, I guess,
I think
And
it's also really hard, like when you've grown up. So I also didn't know that I was autistic until way later,
Mhm.
way later in life. I don't remember the first time that I had like any confirmation from either of my parents, but I think the first time was I was just going for a walk with my mom after I'd kind of had a bit of like an episode, and was
Mhm.
like, I think I'm autistic, because I've talked to so many people, or I've seen like so many things about autism or heard things about autism that like resonate with me. And my mom was like, "Oh yeah," and I was like, "What do you mean? Oh yeah?" She's like, "Yeah, like I mean, we kind of figured that out when you were a kid." I was like, "What? Why
Oh,
did you say
wow.
something?" But so that's how I found out, and I was already like 20. I
Wow.
was like 20 years old. So I didn't know for the majority of my adolescence, or almost, so all of my adolescence. I don't know when that technically stops, but and so there's this piece that you don't know whether or not it's something that you already know, or is it something that's innate, or is it something I had to train myself to do?
Mm.
Like, am I good at picking up on nonverbal communication? Am I naturally expressive of empathy and things like that in the way that neurotypical people are? Or did I just have to like forcibly train myself to pick up on things in a different way that I could understand? Because I feel like when they talk about, um, in I think the first episode with, I think it's with Michael, they talk about, training facial expressions, those pieces of nonverbal communication, and how he was able to, like, he almost has a gift now of like sensing that people are feeling something and they're masking it. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like,
That was, yeah.
that hits so hard, because I just remember being in high school and being like identifying things with different people, trying to practice understanding how they were feeling, asking a ton of questions so that I could put together what they were doing with how they were feeling.
Mm.
And it, it made me feel like an alien studying the human race,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, it truly does. Like, especially because like I'm someone who didn't do that. Like, I was someone who would just try to watch. Like, I wouldn't ask questions very rarely until I started asking questions in college. I think more often than not. But before that, I was like, I'm just gonna see what happens. And so I watched. People watch. I watched a ton of movies. I was and still am obsessed with movies, and I think that kind of started there. Um, Plus, like, theater just allowed me to practice that masking in a different way, and that I think that has a lot to do with it as well. I think that when you're in theater, like, I feel like there's a reason why there's an influx of thespians who are also autistic. It just
Oh,
is,
there's got to be.
you
Also,
know.
so here's what I like. I think there's an entire other chapter of this that is of this conversation that is just about the relationship between autism and storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
and how autistic people use storytelling to inform their entire reality. And like, so when we talk about representation, of autistic people, but just the representation of society, of human beings, and human, like, what is good behavior, and how people normally express their feelings, the way that impacts people with autism is like, you know, that's our whole textbook. That's media and literature is our textbook for life. When human beings, or when our family, it doesn't fill in the blanks, you know, when our surroundings, our own environment doesn't, or our own minds don't fill in those blanks for us, we have literature and media to fill in the rest in some way, and we try. It's almost our spark notes of social environments.
Yeah, that's so real. And I also, like you said, how sometimes you wonder if it's a conscious thing, masking, or if it's something that you have just learned like innately. I definitely remember distinct moments where I was like clocking what certain reactions meant and what certain nonverbal cues meant. Like, I definitely remember a time where I was like, okay, I'm gonna really try to just get this right. Because at a certain point, I like knew that I was different. And that's the thing, is you know that you're different. Like, you know it, you feel it. And I remember there was like a day where I was like, okay, I'm just gonna be really good at being around people. And it was like, I felt like I was trying to like boot camp myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course that gets exhausting over time. Like, you can't necessarily, I mean, if you can, great. But like for me, I definitely was like, okay, all this energy into being with people, great. Now I'm going to go sleep for 12 hours. Like,
oh my gosh. Like, when I'm not on my meds right now because I'm just having another, what's the best way to say, snafu, I guess is the most polite way to say, with insurance and healthcare, and just trying to get my prescription filled, and the pharmacies citing none of them want to work with my insurance. So for like about a week, I've been off of my medication, and it's always this kind of weird experiment where I'm like, you know, like I still feel like I'm in class on being a person.
yes. Oh, yes. Yes. I definitely feel like I'm, and it can be frustrating sometimes to like feel like I'm still trying to figure out how to be a human, and I feel like everyone else has like figured out the code. Or like, an analogy I use sometimes is like, I feel like sometimes at birth, when people got dropped off by the stork, you know, that they got dropped off with like a manual, and I got page 5 and nothing else.
Right.
That's how it feels sometimes.
Huge pieces missing where I don't know. Like, I feel like when you start watching a show, like a new, like, you know, because we've all been binge watching tons of shows on Netflix and Hulu and the wonderful streaming services that have guided us through this this horrible pandemic. When you start a new show, you like start immediately placing different characters in their little spots in the grid, going, okay, well, obviously we start with the protagonist, and there's the the main antagonist for the show. That person's going to become important later, probably. This seems like a love interest. That's a wise older character, mentor figure. Like, you start doing that, and I feel like the only person I can't do that with is myself. Like, I have no idea. I can't place me. I have no idea which one I'm supposed to be. I don't know if I'm just the wild card villain character who's just gonna lose it later on 4 seasons down the road, or if I'm like the incredible redemption arc character who becomes everyone's favorite in 3 seasons. I don't know. Protagonist would be great, but that's wishing, you know? I have no idea which one I'm supposed to be. I could be any of those things, but no one ever told me which one I was going to be. And I feel like everyone else kind of they know who they are. They can look at their own history and know their own brand, their own character identity. I just never had that.
Yeah, that's so real. I feel like, and I think that correlates with the whole empathy thing, because it's not exactly empathy, but it's like a lack of understanding of how other people experience the world. in terms of like you. So like for me, I have a very similar story, as in like I didn't know what people thought of me unless I asked, or like how people perceived me unless I asked. Like I wasn't one to pick up on the vibe. And I think a lot of that had to do with not having a strong friend group that affirmed me in ways for a long time. I think for a long time I was kind of like floating around like, okay, like if y'all like spending time with me, I'm good. I don't have to feel like a person. I just need to be a part of it. And
Oh my
you
God.
know, like
Yeah.
you don't have to treat me like a person. I'm good. Just like let me hang out. Like
In a way that I've never been able to just stick with a certain friend group. Like I don't have the same. I have people that I've become very, very close with. I have a best friend or family. Like some people just kind of sprinkled everywhere that are kind of chosen family that really know me. But having a friend group, like a social circle, never been able to really do that. Latched onto a significant other's friend group or something like that, or like a friend's, like one person that I get along with, and so I just follow their social circle for like a hot minute and then move on, because I don't know how people feel about me at any given moment. And so it's hard to trust them, because not that I'm necessarily paranoid or afraid of other people in a social environment, but I don't want to be where I'm not wanted.
Right. Absolutely.
You don't know that unless people tell you, and you kind of need that affirmation and that validation. You're just like, well, I guess I'm good here. I'll move on to the next Hogwarts Quidditch team until I find my spot.
Yeah, you are literally speaking my entire experience. Like, literally, yes. Like
That's
it's
really
like
good to hear. Actually, that's not one that I knew really. I don't know if I knew that was an autism thing, or maybe
I
it's
feel
not.
like
I don't
it's
know.
very common. Yeah, and because I'm part of this like autistic people's Facebook group, and we just like talk about like random things that happen to us, and
That would be great.
yeah. It's actually a very common thing because it is the like needing affirmation of like, oh, like we're good, or like I consider you a friend. Like, you know, like sometimes I
Yeah.
legit need like, are we friends? Like sometimes I legit like need that, which like I'm not going to do that to people. Especially people who I haven't felt like it's like extremely reciprocal. Like, you know, I'm not going to do that.
If someone calls me in a situation, I think what I use is just my cue. I think this is what I use like subconsciously as my cue, as whether or not someone trusts me. Whether I trust them is like, I have no idea. But whether or not I think that they like really see me as like a good friend is if they call me in moments of really serious like vulnerability.
Yes.
But day to day, like I live in Minnesota, I live in the world of niceness. So people don't do that.
Man.
Really, like people, you know, the thing is they'll give you directions anywhere else in the world except their own house. You know, the thing is they're like, yeah, oh, I can help you get to anywhere, just not to my place. But like, sure. So they'll get close, but never that close. And so it's hard to know. Like, it's hard to know if anyone is really my friend or if they like me or if we're. And even saying this out loud, I feel paranoid. Like I feel like it makes me sound paranoid. But that's just the thing, is that you just don't really know who is putting up with you
Yes. Oh,
liking you. And that's how I've always felt with most people.
same. Literally same. Like even and it's hard because I very recently went through a situation where like someone who I thought was like I thought we were on the same page and we really weren't. And so that just kind of like freaked me out. And so I had a minute where I was like, okay, like like we're just gonna take a break from the people thing. Like
No, I know, right? It's like you finally get like you feel like you finally have been looking at this painting long enough to know that it's a painting. And then somebody just walks out of the painting and you're like, oh God, what is reality? I don't know where I am, who's a person.
Literally, I was like, wow, bye.
Yeah.
I'm going to bed.
You're right. And then you have to move on somehow. So we're very good pack mules. Like we're very good like at just getting up and walking and finding a new, like making a new space somewhere else, at least for now. But that's so hard to do your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it truly is. I mean, it's a marathon. Like, that's why it's so important to, and that's why I've been really trying as of late to invest in myself more and like in my self-care, because, you know, if I can't just run on E. Plus, like, I have a life, you know, like I have a job, I have a business, I have a platform. Like, we're not out here just, you know?
Mhm.
So I'm just really I'm trying to just discern more, like whose energy I'm around and who I give my energy to, and just like be take better care of myself when I'm not, you know, around people.
Did you okay, so this is kind of a personal question, but it's only for the sake of a really long-winded analogy, so don't it's not we're not getting too far here. But have you used dating apps like Tinder or Bumble or any of the swiping type?
Absolutely. It is a godsend for me. For me.
Okay, so we can totally get back to that, but the only reason I brought that up is because I work at Starbucks right now. I work at
Mm-hmm.
Starbucks in a Target in Uptown Minneapolis.
Uh-huh.
So I see like 100,000 people. Not really. Okay, probably in total like 50 because it's COVID. So I don't really
Mm-hmm.
see that many people. But I feel like every day I have this like I'm swiping through people as they come up to order coffee. It's like a new interaction with a new person, and I socialize with them way more than I think I have to because
Mm-hmm.
I take a lot of pride in the fact that I get people now or like I that I can socialize well and that I can make people feel special and feel good about themselves. So I take I put a lot of effort and energy into making them feel seen and feel like, you know, they had someone care about them in their day. So that gives me this experience of feeling like I'm on Tinder or Bumble swiping through humans. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who do I like? What kind of people do I actually really want my life to be about? And do I want to like if I could just make up my own social circle? They do that a lot in the show in Love on the Spectrum. They do a lot of asking, what do you think your ideal relationship would look like, or who would be your ideal, who would you like to marry if you could just wave a magic wand? And they all give really interesting answers, but like that is so much for me simply because I've been okay with relationships for such a long time. Socializing was always so much harder. So if it's like, who could you just make up a friend group? Go ahead. Oh my God, that's so hard for me. I have no idea who are my people. I don't know. Who is my tribe? That's
Yeah.
always kind of been a really difficult question.
See, I feel like that's so interesting. I feel like recently I've had the opposite problem. I feel like I'm more solid in my friendships and then like discerning like who my people are. And that probably is because in college I joined a lot of student groups and they were very distinct student groups. So I was like, oh my gosh, like, and in part it's because like they were very like POC and just like warm people and just like truth tellers and people who weren't trying to front, like people who were like, I will tell you if something bothers me. Like, you know?
I didn't
And,
realize until yesterday that like almost all of the people that I've actually like been like, hey, do you want to actually like connect outside of this weird Starbucks Target environment that I work in?
mhm.
All been women of color.
See,
So
you know?
I'm like, oh, I'm instantly comfortable with this person, and I hadn't been like, and I try to stay pretty aware of my choices, who I'm talking to, and not like, you know, I'm not. In other words, I see color and I see gender. It's not like I'm not paying attention to who I'm
Mhm.
talking to and who I'm making friends with, but just I didn't quite realize the frequency until I started going through like my new contacts. And
Mm.
it's like, yeah, I'm in Uptown Minneapolis and all my new friends are Black women.
And you know what, too? I do think that, and this is like a testament to Black women, I think that we are very trained to accept the other, quote, quote, because we are othered so often and we're so low on the quote totem pole, you know, the hierarchy, the social hierarchy, that we're just used to accepting people with open arms. And I think that we just are that way because, you know, we never really had a, a choice to be exclusive. And so we kind of are in the habit of just being like, yo, like, welcome home. And that's something that I love. And that's something that I would like to keep. And it's like, yeah, so that makes a lot of sense to me.
See, I have a big old question there too, and that's because I feel like it's hard to like assign things. And so, is this me as a queer person, as a non-binary person, as yeah, or is this me feeling this way as a ADHD, autistic, depressed, socially anxious person, and trying to separate those two things out into two different bubbles, my queerness and my lizard brain, trying to make those two different unique rule sets is impossible. It's like trying to unmake tea. You can't do it. You can't separate the tea from the water. It's impossible at this point. How often do you feel like what you're dealing with is feeling like you're on the outside? Like, can you tell when you're being put on the outside because you're a Black woman versus when you're feeling like you're on the outside because you're not neurotypical?
This is a very good question, because I can often not discern that. I often have no idea which of them is the cause, quote, quote. I just never know. So I will find myself in moments where, like, okay, like, did this person not, did we not click because of our different background? Did we not click because I made them uncomfortable? Like,
I mean, sometimes I can't even tell if it's because I'm from Chicago, like, or from versus Minnesota. Like, I can't even tell. That's some of the reason that I'm like talking to people, and there's just nothing happening here. We're not getting each other, and I'm like, maybe it's because they're afraid of queer people, or maybe it's because I'm just perceiving them as acting weird because I can't see.
I don't know.
I can't see there. Or maybe it's because I'm just from Chicago and I'm too loud. Like, that's it.
That's so real. Especially, oh my God, especially in dating.
Am I not supposed to be singing in public? What's wrong with you people?
Like, was I not supposed to break out in song? Excuse me? But yeah, it's
the other level on top of this, that's musical theater people.
Right. And it's especially, and it's especially with dating. In my case, it's where I've had the most difficulty, because I'm someone who, like, regardless of who you are, I'm gonna act like we're best friends. Not in terms of like texting or anything, but just like, I will treat you as if I know you, even if you're a stranger. And that's the way that I am. But I think a lot of people are not used to that. Mm-hmm. And so they will, like, I've had a few instances where guys who were either guy friends of mine or guy acquaintances would assume that I was trying to, like, start something when I was really just being friendly. Mm-hmm. Like, there was an assumption that I was flirting when I was like, I just am existing. Like, so that causes complications, and it also causes complications where if I can't read somebody, or they're like being really nice and are telling me like platitudes, or are telling me that like everything's fine, that they're enjoying their time with me, I'm not going to think anything other than what they have told me, And it's hard when you're like,
100% had that experience with someone recently where I met them at where I was working, and then we were like, let's exchange information. Or like, just follow me on Instagram. And we had kind of done this little vague, I don't want to sound dramatic or wax poetic, but dance, like, kind of back and forth, where I was like, oh yeah, I'm queer, but I like just said through queer community inside jokes, we communicated that we were both queer and might be interested in each other. But mm-hmm. I had no idea at first if that's really what happened or if that was just in my imagination, until I like texted them a couple days ago, and they were like, oh no, this is exactly what happened. You vaguely pointed out that you're bi. I vaguely pointed out that I'm bi. We made an inside joke. We connected. You got my Instagram. That's what happened. We're flirting. This is correct. And I was like, oh, thank God. I was so confused.
It's so confusing. There's so many little idiosyncrasies and like nonverbal things with dating specifically that determine everything. Where it's
Right.
like, okay, it's one look that can determine whether someone's into you or whether they're like running for the hills. You know what I mean? Like, it is just
Also, like, we register things like touch way differently. Like, I think I register touch and affection and things like that way differently than probably a lot of autistic people too. But like the way we register sensory is different in general. So
mm-hmm.
things that might not bother or even like track with other people are just like a giant blinking light for us. So like a touch on the shoulder, like, oh my god, that's so funny. Hand on the shoulder. To me, I'm like, like there's a
Yeah.
big flag that went up, and I'm like, they just touched me. Everyone, they just touched me. And they're just like laughing. That's it. They're just, I'm like, no, but there was a thing. Did no one else see the thing that happened? That like almost all sensory can be like that, like depending on if it's out of nowhere to you. Like if it feels to me like we're just talking and then suddenly someone touched me, I'm like, stop everything.
Stop the presses. That's so real. Oh
Yeah.
my God.
So I don't
Yeah.
know how to register things like that when it happens.
Yes, or like what it means or like what it doesn't mean, unless someone explicitly says, which is so annoying because people don't explicitly say anymore. I mean, that I've experienced. I don't know. I don't have a lot of dating experience, but like from my understanding, people oftentimes don't explicitly say, "Hey, I'm into you."
Mm-hmm.
Like what they'll do is like text you or call you or ask to hang out, but they won't explicitly say until it like gets to a point where like, okay, do we want to be together? You know. It's so hard, and it's so funny too because like now on dates I feel like, I mean, I definitely don't say, hey, I'm an autistic person. I mean, if you want to, that's your prerogative. I just don't do that on like the first date. But what I say is I am very direct and I appreciate very direct communication, like more on the side of blunt than not.
Absolutely. I don't think I have to tell people that, as far as they just figure it out very quickly, because I think that's also part of like, not, I don't mean that you shouldn't have to tell people that. I think I make it, without wanting to or meaning to, I make that appallingly apparent in the first like minute of me. In fact, most of the people I meet, it's because I'm like, I love your dress. I just wanted to let you know I really love your dress. It's so cute. You're rocking a floral moment. Have a nice day. Like, and then move on. And I can't help doing that. It's this little puppy dog inside me that just needs to be like, hi, I like you. I like how
Yeah.
you smell. Like,
Yeah, no, literally. I like, yeah, and I stopped doing the thing where I police myself of being like, oh, Shemaya, like that's a little too autistic. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm getting better. I'm getting better at that. I haven't completely annihilated that little voice.
I
But
think
I'm getting better at just being,
noticed this. The first, when you're talking about policing, I was with my older brother, who I love, has always been a wonderful social guide to me. But we were at Barefoot Bay, which, if
oh my
people
gosh.
watch this who are not Mundeleinians, who are not from the small town of Mundelein, Illinois, yeah,
Mundelein.
we are. I was with my brother at Barefoot Bay. We were in middle school. And he was like, you know, you don't have to say hi to everyone. You didn't even know his name. And I was like, no, yeah, but like I pass him in the hallway all the time and I always wave. And he was
Yeah,
like, why? And I was like, because I see him all the time.
really, yeah.
He was like, do you know who he is? And I was like, no, but we see each other a lot. Physically. Like, I mean, I've seen him repetitively. That's it. That's my
That's
bother.
literally, yes. Yeah.
He was like,
Legit.
no, you don't have to do that. You know, it's kind of a little, not, he wasn't like, you're weird. He was just like, you, like other people don't have to do that either. And it's not bad if you don't. So if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. And I was like,
Yeah, it would feel weird for me to not acknowledge somebody that I know that I see all the time. Even if I've never talked to them before, it would be weird for me to not acknowledge them. I don't know.
yeah, I think, yeah, 100% feel the same way. It would feel like something bad happened, or like I just,
Yeah, I'd be like, I'm not mad at you. I don't know. It's just my brain. This is my
right.
brain.
the not doing it would be me telling them something like,
yes,
you
yeah,
know, that would have to be that.
literally. How crazy. But yeah, so what do we want to, let's talk about the things, because I do have a few issues with, not major issues with the show, just like a few things that I was like, oh, like this is interesting. And I think one of the things was, it was very clear who the show was for, like who the target audience was, just based on how the autistic people were presented and like in the kinds of autistic people that they chose to follow throughout the show. So like
Okay.
it seemed like, and I hate the terms high functioning and low functioning.
And it does feel wrong, especially because of how much I've learned since then about how different disabilities present themselves and like how we perceive them versus how the person is actually perceiving themselves and what's around them. That can be really misrepresentative. It can be really wrong. And it obviously, it's not a dynamic way to look at it as a binary of just low and high disabilities.
Yeah.
It's not very helpful, but sorry, what were you?
Oh, I was just saying, I'm trying to just, it was they used a very specific kind of autistic person in the series. And I'm like, okay, like if your target audience is neurotypicals, like I guess you're trying to show like the most interesting representation. You know what I mean? Like,
I did feel a little bit like, there are still times when I see things like that and I question like, should I stop calling myself autistic? Is that not right?
right.
And that's obviously not it. But it is, I think, definitely showing. I think they showed a little bit of a range. They definitely showed a range, but not the very highs and the very, very lows. It was, I think, what would make it, I think, in their minds, worth doing the show about, which I hate to say it that way, like to place value on it, but it's like, I think for people who are as high functioning as where most people would have no idea that they had autism, like if you have to tell people you have autism, and not just to say this is which disability I have, but like they wouldn't have known you had a disability at all, then to make a show about it or to include that in the show, I think would make it harder to create those distinctions for the audience. Like, I don't know if it makes it easy for the audience to recognize the difficulties being faced. Whereas showing that, with someone who's more mid to low functioning, and show how difficult dating can be for them, when you just kind of extrapolate on that or expand on that, kind of go, okay, well, if that's what that person is struggling with, then maybe the person who is autistic, who I'm dating, but is much more high functioning, is struggling with, they could be struggling with the same thing. It's just it's showing up differently.
Yeah.
Things like that you can kind of do when you at least set a like a bar, if that makes sense. I don't know. I hate saying it that way, like setting a bar. I don't know. That sounds wrong.
Yeah, but I see what you mean. I totally see
Standards
what you mean.
are racist, so.
It was that thing that caught my eye. And the other thing that caught my eye, or rather my ears, was, I don't know, the background music they were using was kind of like very infantile. Like it was kind of alluding to like look at these children.
My partner caught that too when we were watching it. And it's
I was like, oh,
condescending. It's absolutely condescending, especially when most of the people there are between the ages of like 20 and 30. I don't even know if there were people who were younger than that. I don't think there were. So these are all adults.
They're grown. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Yeah. And I also think that that's a common thing with neurotypicals in life, is there's this, if someone doesn't know that you're autistic, then what they do know is that you're different, quote, quote. And so they'll like treat you almost like a child.
Right.
And, which like is better than, abusing you. But, it's just, is also kind of condescending.
So, you know that my best friend in the entire world is a guy named Oscar Rodrigo Araiza Bravo.
He was on my podcast too.
When was he on your podcast?
He was with the When Wellness is a Privilege panel. Yeah, you should watch that. It's on YouTube.
Oh, I think he might have actually told me about that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so he I will watch it 100%. When I met him, the reason that we connected so quickly was because I was like the only person who didn't treat him like a child, being a non-English speaker. And like he was in our, in choir and everything. He was our age, like 15 years old. We're like the same age. He was maybe 3 weeks older than me. And for some reason, all of these people around me are treating this kid like he's a newborn puppy. Or just like this little, pat him on the head. He's like, oh, what a cutie. Because his English was still broken. He just freaking got there. And they're like, oh, he's so sweet. He doesn't, he doesn't understand. And I was like, no, he's just doesn't speak English. But he has just as many miles on him as you do. And so that was that, like, maybe that's why I felt that connection, or I kind of saw that as like saw him being condescended and felt like I understood not to condescend and not to look down, because he couldn't speak English. As well as, eventually he would obviously become fluent and become a doctoral candidate at Harvard, getting, degree in quantum physics. Oh, yeah, right. I just like really want to show that. I want to show all of his like incredible success to the people who were patting him on the head when he got to the country in whatever that was, 2011. Yeah, it was just this thing that like we immediately connected, because I was like, yeah, no, I know who you are. I know that you're, yeah, just treating him like how I would treat myself, or yeah, I think that was why part of the reason that we connected so quickly is because I felt that pain. I was like, oh God, I hate being looked down on for seeming like, just because there's a disconnect, because I'm the different.
Yeah. And it starts to, sometimes it like works at your self-esteem, because I definitely remember like not too long ago at all, just like beating myself up for being quote weak, or being what's the word naive, when it's like there are things that I notice other people don't notice, just as there are things that they notice I don't notice. It's just like I'm operating on a different plane, and I think that's something that we have to remind ourselves of, is like, we're not stupid. And even if people treat us like we're stupid, we're not. Like,
Yeah, I think someone on the show said that too. I think like there was someone on Love on the Spectrum who had mentioned that like the being condescended and being looked at as though, I think it was probably Maddie. And she's my favorite. I loved that girl. She was great.
I know, she's so cool.
She was so cool. I was like, oh, she's too cool for all these people. That's why she hasn't found, like, I was like, that's why she hasn't found anyone to date yet, is because she's probably just too cool for everyone. It's not autism. It's because she's just like intimidatingly funny. But yeah, so I don't remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, just the condescension and being like talked to like you're a child, or like you're stupid because they got to the thing first. Like they got the point quicker, or something like that. They were still a part of the conversation when somewhere in that conversation there was an aspect that booted you out because you are autistic.
Or you don't feel comfortable articulating those thoughts in a group, and so you shrink because you don't feel like you can do it with the pressure. It's yeah. Like I definitely relate to, like, even in friend groups, very much feeling like the pet of the group, which, like, as a Black woman, doesn't do great things for your self-esteem. Doesn't really help that. But yeah. And
thinking,
also, like, in most of my friend groups in the past, having been the only Black person, or the only person of color in a lot of, the only Black person, rather. But yeah. It's all intertwined.
yeah, sometimes I've actually felt that being fat sometimes. And like, I don't know if I'm being, patted on the head, or people are laughing at me even though I didn't mean to be funny, things like
Yeah.
that. And I confuse it for whether or not, is this because I said something weird, or is this because they see me as a chubby, funny, Seth Rogen guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never understood why people found me funny. And it it was interesting because after finding out that I was autistic, I definitely went through a phase of like, I hate all these people for treating me like a child. I hate all these people for dismissing me, and like, and
Mhm.
I really had to just like cool it, because I don't know, it's complicated because you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. You also want to hold them accountable. But like at the same time, you can't make someone understand you. And I have to keep like reminding myself that it is not my job, nor do I have the ability to make someone understand me. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely times where I look back, especially to like, and not because middle school was easy for everyone else. Obviously, middle school is the hell that no one tells you about before you get there. But
Okay.
like, just the teachers that I would love to just sit them down and explain.
Mm.
Like, did you watch um what was it? It was the follow-up to Nanette. I watch it. It's amazing.
Okay. Before we skedaddle, is there anything that you wanted to, anything that caught your attention from the show that we haven't talked about? Like,
Oh, that I found the I think Jody. I found the kind of expert they brought on, who
mm-hmm.
the dating coach for people on the spectrum. Um, I found her to be a really interesting person. And like, I just found them using her, like having her on the show, to be really interesting, because it's my partner and I talked about that, and I was like, well, what really is her credibility? Like, is there training on that? And
Mm-hmm.
but is there an accreditation for coaching autistic people in romantic relationships? Probably not. um, I doubt that. But
Mm-hmm.
that does definitely, I think, point out just how untouched the subject is, in a lot of, I like, most of the world.
Yeah.
Like, if not to say that she was doing a bad job or anything, I was just really curious, in another setting, they might bring on an expert who has a doctorate in something related to the.
I think that'd be really great, because that also there were
She was doing
moments.
a really incredible thing for them, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, I'm like, where do you go to really dig into that when it is such a wide spectrum? It's really whoever has experience and practice and hands-on, like, dealing with helping people get through it.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no. I was just gonna add that, yeah, I would be interested to see what like a specialist with a doctorate or like a master's or geez, just some sort of, certification would have to offer in that sense. Like, because there were a few moments where I was like, I don't know.
If
There
this
were
is
a
helping.
few, yeah, there were a few moments where I was like, okay, like, so I'm interested to see what that would be
I
like.
thought the kind of coaching session with Kelvin was really interesting to watch, and whether or not, like, I don't know, it makes me wonder kind of what is the method being used to. But also, if there is a relationship coach for people with autism, that person should be writing books for everyone else too. Because if you
Yes.
could do it for people with autism, I mean, you'd solve half the relationship problems in the world.
Because, like, yeah, people could always use communication skills. Like,
Yeah.
people could always brush up on the being direct-to-ness.
Most of what she's, explaining, like, well, you want to make sure that you make them feel like you're interested in who they are.
Mm-hmm.
that the very basic principles could be extrapolated to cover most problems in relationships, or most communication problems in relationships.
Yeah, that was so real. That was really great to see too.
Okay, well,
So
I wanted to bring that up, but yeah, I would love to do this again.
yes. Oh, it was so great to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience. I'm so glad I got to talk to you, and we will talk soon.
Yes, this is super fun, and and it's always wonderful to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you too. Okay, well, have a good night.
Good night, Shamaya.